Pay close attention. What you're about to see is Bible prophecy being fulfilled.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you news as it relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yeshua Hawkins. Well, of course, we're going to talk a little bit today about some dispute in the Christian Orthodox Church. In fact, finally a split, so to speak, between Russia and Ukraine, granted by Constantinople, which has got some people rejoicing and some people a little bit up in arms being upset about it. We'll talk a little bit about the nuclear treaty and how, that was a big push for that during the time period following the Cold War, but it's kind of being dissolved as nations are kind of doing away with that and revitalizing their weaponry. And we have a little bit in the news about the Doomsday clock.
Right.
In fact, that being only 2 minutes to midnight before, the closest it's been since the 1950s. And, a lot of people are wondering not if, but when these nuclear wars are going to start and what they're going to do to save themselves. But first, we're going to start off with a historic split in the Orthodox Christian Church has finally been accomplished. The Patriarch of Constantinople has granted Ukrainian Orthodox Church autonomy. On the eve of the Orthodox Christmas, a special decree was signed officially recognizing an independent Ukrainian Orthodox Church while Petro Poroshenko watched on with tears of joy. The Ukrainian president said afterwards to the many in attendance at the signing, "Thank God it would be impossible without his blessings." He said, "I want to thank the millions of Ukrainians across the globe as this has become possible thanks to your prayers."
Well, not everyone is rejoicing over the split, though. Since 1686, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church has been under the Moscow Patriarchate. Now, it was that way until the fall of the Soviet Union and Ukrainian independence in 1991. Now, as time went on, many in Ukraine voiced the desire for the church's independence. Now, autocephaly means that the Ukrainian church should have its independence in terms of its finances, churches, and land. But the signed documents include Ukrainian church falling under the control of Constantinople.
The Ukrainian Orthodox Church can only control territory within Ukraine and cannot create any parishes abroad, and all disputes are to be settled by Constantinople. So it's basically just replacing Moscow with Constantinople. President Poroshenko, with declining numbers in the polls, hopes to gain support with this recent long-awaited turn of events. The other Orthodox churches, though, are expressing their disapproval.
Well, the Patriarch of Jerusalem, Theophilus III, said the tentacles of globalization are trying to penetrate the church and destroy it. Now, politicians' interference in church affairs is a clear sign of this. The Serbian Orthodox Church said the chauvinistic Russophobes, led by the corrupt politicians and illegally assisted by the Constantinople Patriarchy, have deepened and worsened the already existing split and put the unity of Orthodox Christianity as a whole in danger.
Even within the Ukrainian church, there's a disunity over the split. Vasily Anisimov, a spokesperson for the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, said, "We consider these actions to be anti-canonical. This action will not bring anything but trouble, separation, and sin."
Alexander Dvorkin, a historian and Orthodox theologian, said of the split, "The majority of the Ukrainian church will always belong to the Orthodox Church, and that this move isn't an autocephaly because it's controlled by Constantinople." Now, he also said regarding the holy sites that they are the property of Ukraine and leased to the church, and its members of the church won't allow their holy sites to be taken away from them. So there's going to be plans to work these things out. But the Ukrainian people will not allow the sacrilege of their sites, so they will fight it if it comes to that.
Well, he also said that under Moscow, the Ukrainian church was fully independent with the exception of the election of their leader. Other than that, it was an autonomous of its own. Whatever Constantinople gave him, he said, is a hand-controlled system by Constantinople, set up as all major questions have to be answered by him, along with up to 38 holy sites and churches under its direct control, with the bishop watching over the Ukrainian church to see how to control it. So it's independent, he said, in name only. They changed out from independence for control.
Well, Dvorkin lastly said that he sees this as a part of the all-out war against Russia campaign. Now, it has become a mixture of religion into politics, with even the U.S. State Department being involved in things. Now, the principle of the separations of church and state is being blatantly violated. Now, somehow they see it as a way to weaken Russian influence.
Well, speaking about the war that we see taking place within Christianity, particularly the Christian Orthodox, Russia was involved in that time period of the Cold War, and also nuclear treaty in regards to nations starting to put aside and start to dismantle over a period of time their nuclear weapons. But, you know, that's coming up in the news again, and of course it's got some people asking questions regarding it because we see nations doing just the opposite. So we have our field correspondent Larry McGee, who has some news for us regarding the nuclear treaties, and is it ongoing or is it kind of being dissolved? Larry, what do you have for us?
Among those conscious of and watching world affairs, there is deepening concern over multiple factors that are all pushing the nations towards world war. One of those elements is the renewed arms race between Russia and the United States, a dangerous development which America attributes to non-compliance on behalf of Moscow to the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, which was drafted and signed with the intent to curb nuclear proliferation between the two. Subsequent to a recent meeting in Geneva, where representatives from both nations convened to discuss the matter, America officially concluded that Moscow is operating in violation of the treaty and announced its intent to withdraw from the agreement by the beginning of this coming month. The monumental treaty, which was signed by Presidents Reagan and Gorbachev, called for both nations to destroy any missiles with a range of 300 to 3,500 miles and prevented either Moscow or Washington from testing, firing, or deploying any such missiles going forward from that point. Officials from the current U.S. administration allege that Russia has been out of compliance with that agreement for a decade, and President Trump himself has come out in support of that assertion, adding that the U.S. is not going to allow Russia to violate the treaty and go out and make weapons, while America is not allowed to. Signee to the agreement, former President Mikhail Gorbachev has called President Trump's decision not the work of a great mind. And there are also questions now looming as to whether Russia has actually breached the treaty, or if this is just another instance of the current administration going to war. The war in Syria has taken more American lives after a bomb was recently detonated in a crowded area in Manbij. The blast was filmed and has been broadcast by various news agencies, and Islamic State has acknowledged accountability for the attack. This is the first incident of this kind since the president announced America's intent to withdraw from Syria, and it occurs in a city which is regarded as having great strategic importance. The city of Manbij has been the site of intense clashes between Turkey and Kurdish forces, and the Kurds, who currently have governance over the area, have asked for increased military assistance from the Syrian government in anticipation of an escalation in hostility between them and the Turks. Hostility is also increasing between the U.S. and the democratically elected government of Venezuela after President Trump gave official state recognition to a politician in that country who has declared himself to be the interim president. In response, the nation's president, Nicolas Maduro, officially severed ties with the United States and gave American diplomats 72 hours to exit the country. The U.S. State Department fired back by saying that the embattled president has no authority to break ties with Washington and that the U.S. will continue relations with the nation through coup leader Juan Guido as opposed to President Maduro. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Katan Jeff, back to you.
Well, Larry's article there with Venezuela, Katan, you see the, of course, the riots taking place in there over this disputed president here. But we also see that the nations are now chiming in. They're giving their opinion on this as well.
Right.
As we continue with the story here, the U.S.'s choice to back Juan Guido, the opposition leader, as Venezuela's interim president, has provoked reactions from countries opposed to U.S. intervention, including Iran. The Iranian Foreign Ministry says that they back the Maduro government and disagree with any foreign interference in the South American country's internal affairs. An Iranian spokesperson said Tehran also supports the existing Venezuela government against those who would try to start a military coup or adopt other anti-popular measures.
Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova also spoke out against the U.S. and their allies for pushing aside the authority of the legitimate president Nicolas Maduro. Zakharova warned that if there was any military intervention in Venezuela, it would create a catastrophic scenario. And yet another country often at odds with the U.S., Turkey, has weighed in on the South America situation. The Turkish president himself offered his support to Maduro through phone calls.
Also, why is there so much concern over Venezuela's leader? Well, Venezuela has the world's largest oil reserves, which is at the heart of the power struggle taking place right now. And of course, that, Katan, has everybody's interest focused in that area because of that oil. Well, now the U.S. is increasing pressure on Maduro and his supporters by threatening to channel the country's petrol revenues to Juan Guido.
Interesting. While the U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton says this could be a difficult task to accomplish, his team is working on making it reality. Mr. Bolton told reporters, "What we're focusing on today is disconnecting the illegitimate Maduro regime from the sources of its revenues. We think, consistent with our recognition of Juan Guido as the constitutional interim president, that those revenues should go to the interim government."
Well, and if they can actually accomplish that and shift those revenues into the interim president's hands, that would certainly affect President Maduro right now.
That's right.
Well, moving east to the Pacific Ocean now, just off of China's coast, is the disputed waters of the South China Sea. Does China actually have right to claim the 3.5 million square kilometer area that borders Malaysia, Brunei, the Philippines, Vietnam, and totally encompasses Taiwan? Well, in an interview with former Naval Intelligence Officer John Jordan, RT wanted to find out. Well, Jordan explained that the Hague International Court had ruled against China and for the Philippines in a case that was decided in 2016.
But Jordan says the key to understanding this is understanding China's economy. China's economy basically depends upon completely on the ability to import energy and raw materials via sea lanes and its ability to ship exports out via those same sea lanes. Now, the South China Sea sees about $5 trillion worth of goods transit that area every year. And more than half of the oil that you see on tankers each year also transits that area. So China's economy and its existence, its livelihood, depends upon free travel throughout this spot.
And as we've reported before, Katan, that China has been working laboriously to build up these shallow sandbars around the Spratly Islands, to basically create, their own islands by pumping, dredging that sand on top there. And what they've done, they've taken these these man-made structures and now built airports there with runways. Right. They've actually have hangars for planes as well as the anti-aircraft and anti-missile systems, according to the satellite data that was analyzed by the Washington-based Center for Strategic and International Studies. So they've done a tremendous amount, and now they've invested with them, investing so much into this area. it's very unlikely that they're just going to give it up.
Yeah, I doubt that. So, of course, this behavior is not only threatening to the surrounding countries, but to the United States and its allies as well. So, to counteract the Chinese trying to dominate the region, we've seen them conduct what they call freedom of navigation maneuvers in the South China Sea, which, as Jordan explains, is basically warships transiting the area which everyone else recognizes as international waters. The Chinese don't, and the Chinese do not want the 7th Fleet or the Philippines or the Vietnam or anybody else in that area also. So everyone else recognizes it as international water. China recognizes it as a part of their country.
Claiming it as their own.
Their rights, yeah.
Well, besides the need for free movement in and out of the South China Sea, a reoccurring theme in our report here is the lucrative business of oil. Now, the Chinese government has estimated that there is 17.5 billion barrels of oil in the middle of the Spratly Islands. Now, currently, Kuwait, one of the world's major oil reserves, has 13 billion barrels of oil. So China is looking at that area and seeing the potential for oil production equal to about 1.5 Kuwaits. Now, that makes a lot of sense why the area is so heavily disputed by everyone. Of course, it has to do with the oil.
That's right. And right now, China imports a majority of its oil and natural gas. So we know that they had a big deal with Russia not too long ago regarding
Pipeline.
that. So having access to this oil would be a very big deal for them in regards to resources for them to power their economy and their manufacturing, which they're a very large manufacturer and so forth. But the United States and their allies, they want to have control over that as well. Now, while Israel's military does not usually take responsibility for bombing attacks in Syria, they came out this week admitting they had targeted Iranian special forces near the capital of Damascus. Among the casualties were 4 Syrian soldiers, according to the Russian defense minister. The Israeli Air Force also struck the Damascus International Airport, targeting Syrian air defenses, which, according to the Russian military, intercepted 30 missiles during the attack.
But the 2-day attack should not be a surprise to anyone. Michael Maloof, a former Pentagon official, told RT Israel came out and announced they were going to increase airstrikes on any alleged Iranian sites in the war-torn country. Israel is also upset and calling on the UN to intervene in Lebanon after attack tunnels dug by Hezbollah from Lebanon into Israel had been discovered. So Israel is feeling threatened on multiple levels now, and as Maloof said, it's, quote, a real serious escalation, and it's coming at a very interesting time.
It's an interesting time because look at other recent developments in the region. The United States announces it wants to pull out of Syria, and Russia also has its involvement there with Iran. And now Israel is bringing Syria into its equation also. It looks like a recipe for disaster, and Maloof agrees, saying, I think it's reaching a breaking point because it's just going to take one episode that's out of the norm, that's going to light the fuse and blow up the keg. It's just escalating like crazy.
Well, Israel itself is a place of uncertainty these days. Now, with the looming possibility of an indictment, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government is calling for early elections in April. Now, while this is 6 months ahead of schedule, Netanyahu feels it is the right time for elections. Now, this is due in part to the Hezbollah tunnels that were recently discovered. But the other reason is over the last 6 weeks, Netanyahu's government was narrowly the majority with 61 seats in the Knesset out of 120. But a recent poll showed the prime minister winning the upcoming election. So go ahead and let's have the elections now because the polls are showing I would win.
Right, yeah. Well, we talked a little bit before in times past about the doomsday clock and the fact that not too long ago it recently was moved to just 2 minutes to midnight. And of course, this doomsday clock was created by the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist Group, and they're the ones that are responsible for changing the time on the clock. as they take into consideration current events, what they see looming between nations, the buildup of war, the tensions like we see has been taking place between China, the United States and Russia, the United States and Iran, and they're the ones that are responsible for that. But we have a video we want to show you as we take a look at the Doomsday Clock and its move and why it is moving, why it is 2 minutes to midnight, and what this means for the world.
When this takes place, thousands of tons of atomized earth, stone, brick and steel are sucked up into the mushroom cloud.
Humanity is teetering dangerously close to the apocalypse, at least according to the group of scientists that manage the iconic Doomsday Clock. This year, the hands of the clock were left unchanged from 2018, remaining at an unnerving 2 minutes to midnight. The Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists Group created the Doomsday Clock as a symbolic timepiece that represents humanity's perceived proximity to a human-caused apocalypse. The closer the clock gets to midnight, the higher the chance that we'll completely annihilate the world with technologies and destruction of our own making. Before last year, the last time it was set to 2 minutes to midnight was in 1953, when the US and the Soviet Union tested their first nuclear weapon. Humanity is teetering dangerously close to the apocalypse. Humanity is teetering dangerously close to the apocalypse. Humanity is teetering dangerously close to the apocalypse.
Katan, with the Doomsday Clock there that we just saw, now a year ago it was 2.5 minutes till midnight. So they moved it to 2 minutes, and now recently they come out once a year, and they decided they were going to keep it at 2 minutes to midnight. Now, as we saw in the video, closest it's been there to midnight, which midnight signifies the total destruction there of mankind, but closest it's been since 1953. And if you notice that the scientists, and this is just one group here, seeing the events of the world today. And interestingly, Yisrael Hawkins has been showing these prophecies that this would be the worst time ever. It would be a time when mankind has the ability to completely destroy itself. And as he's preaching that message from the Holy Scriptures, the scientists are actually backing him up, independently backing him up, saying we're seeing the same thing through the world events. So it's not a coincidence that the Scriptures there, which Yisrael Hawkins tells all his viewers, you can rely 100% on what is written in these prophecies, written in the Holy Scriptures, that they are they coincide all of the world events that we see taking place today. So if you'd like to find out more about these stories, contact the House of Yahweh, write them, call them, email them if you'd like, but contact the House of Yahweh, and don't forget to request your free copy of the Prophetic Word magazine and monthly newsletter. Here's how.
To write the House of Yahweh, you can write them at the House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can also call them at 1-800-613-9494. Or you can visit them on any of their websites by going to Yahweh.com, YisraelHawkins.com, or Yahweh'sBranch.com. You can also visit our website by going to YPNnews.com. You can email the House of Yahweh by typing in info@yahweh.com. And for all calls outside the United States, please dial the number on your screen. And of course, as we mentioned in times past, don't forget, as the best resource to aid you in studying your Holy Scriptures, the free online programs of the Yisrael Says and Ask Yisrael programs. You can find those by going to YisraelSays.com and AskYisrael.com.
Well, don't go anywhere. Up next is another message from Yisrael Hawkins explaining those Bible prophecies and how they relate to the world news today. From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
And I'm Katan Alexander.
Thanks for watching.